Welcome. Do you know the difference between a request and a demand? I didn't know this distinction until I was about 35 years old, and now I tell my kids about this distinction, but my guest today goes a lot further in her family, and we'll find out why and what kind of family culture she's been able to create as a result. Joining me today is Marika Páez Wiesen. Marika is a writer, time management and parenting coach who helps women craft lives that feel easier and more satisfying. She's writing a book of playful experiments for women who are ready to break up with all or nothing toxic productivity mindsets that tell us we never have enough, never do enough, and never are enough. I can relate. Marika runs the Substack newsletter Living the In-Between Times, where she offers experiments and workshops to uncover the delight, awe, ease, and worthfulness that are waiting for us in the in-between times of life. So, Marika, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited for the
Me
conversation.
too. Yep, me too. Well, we did a little preparation, so you have a sense of the flow for today. I want to jump in with this first question around, like, what does a family culture of demands look like in your experience?
Well, I mean, I want to start by saying, you know, all parents use demands or issue demands, right? And I guess I should clarify maybe what a demand is first,
Yeah.
right? Which is, it can be a tone of, usually when we think of demands, we think about tone of voice or we think of like choice of words. So pick up your jacket, put on your shoes, right? Get in the car, right? Those all seem like commands, demands. But the truth about demands is that it really goes much deeper than that, which is any time where we are even asking our kids to do something or another person to do something, and we are not leaving room for the possibility of hearing a no, then that's a demand.
Yeah.
So we
If
might
we
say,
I want to unpack that for a minute because I think of the word like direction, which seems so much more like appropriate and nice. Like I'm just giving direction.
yeah,
But there's something about a demand that when I feel into that word, it's like there's a almost like an overbearing threat kind of energy. If
mm,
you don't, there'll be trouble. But I like the way you put it as it's that there's no room for a no. There's no room for pushback. Would you even say there's no room for discussion? Like,
yeah, there's no room for the other person's needs or preferences
yeah,
or sort of what they're experiencing in the moment to come into the conversation. It's really just it's a unidirectional uh,
yeah.
communication.
Hmm.
And like I said, we all do that, and we'll do it through questions, right? Like we'll be polite, we'll be kind with our kids. Like, would you please get your backpack packed, right? Like we'll ask them, but the real work is understanding when are the times where we're really not making space for any kind of answer than no.
Yeah.
And so in some families that's pretty much every time that
Hmm.
the parent is asking the child to do something or wanting the child to
Yeah.
behave in some way, right? And then in other families there might be some requests happening where there is more space for kids to share their needs and experience too.
Yeah. This will be a very humbling conversation for me because I fall into that all the time. So I'm
Sure.
curious
Yeah.
what we'll get to here. Um, Anything more to say about what a culture of demands, as often as it happens, what can that be like to be in a family like that for maybe the child and the parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us grew up in families where that was the culture because I think that's sort of the predominant thinking about sort of parent children hierarchy of power and those kinds of things. And I think the main thing is that if you have a family where the culture is demands, right? The what's behind that is this idea of the reason that you're going to comply, right, is out of fear or because I'm forcing you to, or because I'm expecting you to respect me in some way. I'm sort of like, that's why you should comply, is we're going to have this system in our family where I'm the boss and you are compliant, right?
Yeah.
And that can build up over time in families and in relationships. And I heard a really good analogy, which is that the relationship between people can be like a bank account, like a goodwill bank account. And every time that we make a demand, we're withdrawing from that bank account. And every time that we are able to collaborate together on a solution that's mutual, meets both people's needs, you're making a deposit. And so it's not this idea that we'll never make demands, but this idea of being really mindful of what is the balance in the relationship right now.
Yeah. This leads to the next question, which is, why should we question the use of demands among family members? I mean,
Yeah.
you touched on a little bit. I mean, I can say, yeah, it's that top-down compliance. That doesn't sound like a family, at least the kind of family I want to create for my kids. But what else could we say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I've been reading, following Emily Edlund's Substack, and she just wrote a book about like autonomy supportive parenting.
Yeah.
And this idea that all kids, and all people are successful, right, when their autonomy and their competence and their connection is sort of like honored, supported, nurtured. And so I think, when we think about even like a helicopter parent, right, who's really like trying to sort of control what their kids, the choices the kids are making, right? Every time we're sort of taking away that bit of autonomy, we're kind of conveying to kids, you can't make decisions for yourself, right? You don't know how to, sort of operate on your own. And as a short-term strategy, it can really be fine or work or, work for families. But as a long-term strategy, and we've seen that in a lot of research and writing recently, right? It's detrimental to the kids. And to us and to our connection, right? Like it's not the kind of connection that maybe we want as parents as well, when kids don't feel heard or listened to or consulted at all in the relationship.
Yeah. There's another Substack comment I saw about you can't simultaneously be in control and in connection. Like you either have an agenda or you have connection. And it may not be 100% true, but it makes the point of like you're operating mainly from one or the other.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating and sad.
Yeah. And Brene Brown, actually, I think I heard her on a podcast, and she was talking about how the near enemy of love is control. And that hit me like, oh, yes, I'm trying to control because I love so much, but this is actually taking me away from love,
Yeah. I want to go into, so what you said before a bit about why we should question this demand-oriented culture. I've kind of simultaneous thoughts about there's some age where it's developmentally appropriate to be speaking that way to a child, and then does that shift? And then also I want to say that I'm aware, at least theoretically, even though my kids aren't older, they're 3 and 7 now, that there's going to be a point in their lives when they've learned something from this experience in their family with me and my wife that will carry into their young adulthood and perhaps in their own parenting styles. And it can be scary to think of like, oh, I'm creating a person that would fall very well into an authoritarian culture, whether in a business or a country, like that seems to start in the home when it comes to a topic like demands. So what can you say about maybe that trajectory, but also the first piece about developmentally, like how do we navigate that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that because we know that our kids, they don't have fully developed prefrontal cortexes, and they don't have, lived experience. So those are two sort of handicaps that they're working with when we're trying to collaborate on solving a problem. And so, I also think every kid is different too. Like some kids can feel the connection through the demands, right? They can feel, right? It doesn't have to be that either or kind of thing. And so, ultimately we do want to maintain that connection and keep that going, right? I personally had a kid who couldn't. My son has moderate to severe ADHD, my eldest, my firstborn, and he couldn't feel that I cared. What all he heard was do this, do this, do this, do this. No matter how much, nicely I asked. This is sort of how we started into this, culture of requests, because it like wasn't working for him. Like he was just hearing me command him. But I think I think little kids still have a bank account. I think they still kind of can feel when the adult in the room, the grown-up in the room, is only concerned with their own preferences, their own needs getting met, and not really consulting or asking about sort of how this little being, how it lands for them, right? Yeah. And so I think playing with the balance between, like, instead of saying like, oh gosh, I have to just completely reverse this, but just playing with the balance between making demands and making requests. And then the other thing I would say is little kids can really surprise you, which I'm sure from being a parent of little ones, right? And I think, I think of all the times when my kid was young and we were at the park and he didn't want to leave, right? And you're at the park and you have your adult needs going, right? You know what's going to happen. If you don't leave the park in the next 5 minutes, you won't be able to get to the grocery store to get the thing that you need for dinner, which will make you behind on dinner, which will make the bath behind, which, like, you kind of have your process. Yeah. But all of those are so invisible to your child. Like your child can't see any of that. And they have their own needs in that moment, right? Like they're like, I have a need for play. I have a preference for, exploring more, right? Like I have a preference for being active with my body and not having to get back into a car seat, right? Like all of these things that are going on and inside alive for them. Yeah. And so the work is, and we can get into this, but the work is, how do we frame our adult needs in a way that helps our kids see those needs, identify with those needs, right? How can we frame our needs as actually shared in some ways, right? Like, oh, you know what I'm worried about? I'm worried if we don't leave soon from the park, right? We might get home a little bit late. And if we get home a little bit late, there won't be as much time to, what are the things that kids care about, right? Or one thing I still say to my kids that they really appreciate is they don't like to feel rushed. And so a lot of times I'll say, I know you don't want to feel rushed and you don't like it when I rush you. And so I'm worried if you don't do X right now, that then we're going to be in that rushing thing that, remember, you don't really like. Yeah. Right. So kind of like massaging the needs so that the need that I have becomes their need too. Right. Yeah. And how it's going to affect them. Sometimes I'm honest, like I'm going to be grouchy. Like if you don't go to bed soon and mommy can't go to bed, then you're going to have a grouchy mommy. And I don't like that. I don't like grouchy mommy. And I know you don't like that. Right. That's a good one too. I was feeling it. I'm very project managery, process oriented. I think ahead several steps to my day. Yeah. And it's like ironic that there's a way in which I know that I've been operating, that is, I will rush this moment so we don't have to rush these other moments, which is different than I think you were trying another lens there of inviting shared needs and like, I don't want to rush you, and maybe we can get into this a little later, but there's something there that we'll explore for sure.
I want to dive into where the impulse comes from to issue demands so
Mm,
easily, and
mhm.
this is perhaps it's different in different cultures, but in the Western mindset, let's say, or even just in the US, and even just in your experience, what do you notice seems to be at the root of a demand before it comes out?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's three things, really. Like the first is just habit.
Hmm.
What sort of how you've heard your own parents talk or talk, sort of just what's in the air,
Yeah.
and how we think we're supposed to get kids to do things. Um, I think it's the time pressure, like we've talked about, right? Like there's a lot of pressure.
Hmm.
It's time for in some moments, it might be like a little bit of like perfectionism or achievement culture where we're like, we have to get this right.
Hmm.
And then I think the third one that's really big is fear,
Yeah.
right? Like we're afraid. We live afraid as parents, right? I'm afraid my kid's not going to succeed. I'm
Mm.
afraid my kid's going to be an asshole. I'm afraid, right? Like I'm afraid that all of these catastrophes that we imagine might be looming around the corner for our kids,
Hmm.
um, which I think ultimately comes down to fear about us, right? Like a fear of our own success as a parent. Like, if my kid isn't succeeding, what does that say about me? And how will
Yeah.
I have to think about myself if
Hmm.
my kid, whatever the thing is that you're imagining? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a day when, or several days when I've supported my daughter in making her own eggs.
Mm.
So she's 7, and this is a
It's
newer
great.
skill for her. It's a
Yeah.
great skill. And many times she'll crack the egg in such a way that it goes all over the counter.
Hmm.
And it's so interesting to watch my desire, the impulse that I have is to clean it up, like do something to take over the situation
Hmm.
and maybe think, oh, I should do it for next time. And it's this really hard balance to let her do it, let the failure happen, um, and not be in control, which certainly pokes into a lot of those buttons you mentioned around perfectionism, desire for my child to succeed. Part of that for me, I would add, so that they don't get ridiculed, so that they fit in to the world. And sadly, I can see that in my behavior, and maybe we can talk about this on a wider lens, that impulse to control can actually create that situation where the person later in life doesn't feel like they can function without all this extra inner critic stuff that, thanks to mom and dad,
Yes.
got implanted at an early age.
Right. Yeah, and it becomes that crippling inner voice,
Yeah,
that we all struggle with.
yeah,
And that's not to say that, oh, if we parent perfectly, then our kids won't, right, have
yeah.
their
We'll never have an inner critic. No, that's unfortunately
right,
not true.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this change that you made that was really fascinating. I read the article you shared, which people can read on your Substack. Remind me the name of the article.
Gosh, what was it called?
I might have it here.
The one family rule that makes everything work.
That's all right. Yep. Okay. So you made a big change. Let's talk about the change you made and before you made it, why you felt it was important to make the change.
Yeah,
What was
so
going on for you guys?
I said a little bit about my son and how he was responding to my attempts to get him to do what I want him to do and do
Hmm.
the things we needed to do to kind of get through the day as a family. And there were a lot of meltdowns, and a lot of it had to do with, when you have ADHD, you are, kind of have very big reactions to things. You're
Hmm.
very sensitive to other people's feelings, sensitive to pressure, sensitive to stress. And then you have all kinds of executive function things happening where you don't literally have the skills of what the person is asking you to do.
Hmm.
So you either melt down or defiance is actually a coping mechanism that you use to try to stave off all of the demands that are coming at you that you don't feel like you can complete. So during the pandemic, I think it started before the pandemic. I started learning nonviolent communication, and which is just a communication model that's sort of built around this idea of collaborative problem solving. And I started learning the steps of nonviolent communication, and I was like, oh, this is so great. And it's a little complicated and it takes a long time to learn. And I was like, I don't imagine little kids could do all this. Like, this is too much. But I thought maybe if I could just take one part of it into my family, like, how could that change the dynamic of us trying to get the kids to do certain things? And so I decided to take the last part of the communication system is to make a request. And so I had learned about this idea of asking someone and making space while you're asking them for getting a no, right? So using language like, would you be up for doing this thing? What do you think about this thing that I'd like to happen next, right? So, or even just stating like, I'm hoping that we can go take a bath now. How does that work? Does that work for you? Like, will that work for you if we do one in 5 minutes? Yeah. And really giving that space for, I'm asking you, and there's clearly a space to say yes or no. Right. And so I thought, well, maybe if we go that way, we can kind of wiggle around all of these automatic no's. Maybe then he would actually sometimes say yes. I don't know. So we started using it. And we also started using it because the kids were really like demanding a lot. They were demanding, right? So they were like, oh, I want water. I'm thirsty. I can't find my socks. And they're demanding, and we're like, it just makes you feel so stressed out, right? So we were like, okay, maybe you guys could be making requests as well. So we were like, and actually now that I think about it, it was asking them first to make a request, like, okay, can you make a request with that, right? Can you ask for what you need instead of just yelling into the air, which was, making us also yell. And then we were, kind of, and not yell, but just kind of, that anxious, stressed energy that fills up the house. So we started asking them to make requests, and they were making requests. And then they immediately, like really not very long after, realized, well, what about you guys? Don't you need to make a request? Because they heard us, issuing demands. And we were like, oh yeah, I guess we should be making requests too, since we're telling you this is like the right way to get what you want, or and so that's kind of what the beginning was. it was just I don't even remember how I introduced it. We talked, talking at the dinner table or driving around the car, and I'm like, there's this way that we can ask each other for things. Let's try it.
How old were your kids at this time?
So they were, I want to say they were 8 and 6,
okay,
maybe, or 7. It was between like when my son was 7 and 8. I think he was 8 and my daughter was like about to turn 6. It was like around that time. So
yeah, okay. So and when you talked about it, did it seem like at first they got it, or it took a couple of conversations?
They kind of got it because they'd been, little kids are often, they get a lot of feedback on their communication. So it's like, you didn't say please, you didn't say thank you, right? And so they kind of accepted it as the same kind of feedback, which is like, my grown-ups is saying, if I want the thing that I want, I have to say it in a certain way, so that they would kind of, we would say, I didn't hear a request, and then they'd reframe, and, then.
Oh, that's good.
And when they'd reframe it, what was amazing to me was when they would, they'd be like, I'm thirsty. And then I'd say, I hear a request. And then they'd say, could you get me some water? Like my own, like nervous system response, even though I had told them, like, just say it differently. Like, I could feel the difference in my own body when they were asking me, right? When I felt like I had this sense of agency versus like, get me this thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this.
Oh, and they were doing with each other. That was also really
nice.
game-changing when they were sniping at each other, right? Stop doing that, stop making that noise, stop kicking me, stop this, stop that. And when we sort of said, I didn't hear a request, or so-and-so, can you make a request? I didn't hear you,
Yeah.
right? And then that really, I could see them softening towards each other when they heard that request coming. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's always my desire, is to help my kids move from the antagonizing moments of their relationship to something that's more collaborative and loving, which they do. They have that too.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing just your personal experience around this. And I know you work with moms and you probably have some insights into families, and without breaching anyone's confidence, just generally, what could you say? Have you seen this kind of shift work in other families, or heard about it working for other families as well?
Yeah, I mean, requests is one tool that I often offer the families that I work with, the moms that I work with. And I think the thing that we discover through the coaching is that their request is like at the end of a chain of things that have to happen sort of internally, right? Before you can get to the request, because which is why the request is so, like, having it as a rule is so vital, right? Because it requires you to do the internal work of where am I at right now? Where are my emotions, right? Okay, let me think real quick before I speak to my child. Like, what do I value again? Like, what are my values in communicating with my child, right? And like, what are my needs right now? Because a request is really about a need that you're trying to get fulfilled. And, I think because of all of the reasons we talked about before, it's really easy to sort of rush past all of those and just kind of get to, I want to, you need to do this thing, take out the garbage, it's overflowing. We said it was your job. It's been your job for 4 months, take out the garbage, right? But when we're able to check in with ourselves first, so I've had a few clients sort of working with this idea of making requests, and when they're able to check in with themselves first and sort of think, okay, my kid is playing Rubik's Cube at the dinner table, right? He knows he's not supposed to do that. He knows it's time for dinner. He knows we're not, right? Or my kid has his device out at the dinner table, like, this is a family rule. We're not supposed to do that. They don't, right? We can get really activated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make a request, like an honest request from that activated place. And so this idea of like, how can I make a request actually takes us into, how can I regulate myself enough to make the request? How can I frame my need? What do I need right now? Oh, I think I need peace. I need connection, right? The reason why the cube is bothering me is because I feel like we're not able to have the connection that I want right now, right? And then we don't really know what's going on inside of this kid, like what needs is going on for them. Like, this could be his like first time solving it, or this could be he's trying out a new algorithm and he's super psyched to like finally get it right, or right, we don't know. And unless we make that request, like, hey, would you be able to put that down? Or maybe it's not even would you be able to, right? Like, the rule is we're not going to bring stuff to the table, right? But maybe we're making some space to get some information, right? Like, hey, I notice you have this at the table. What's going on? Because I know we talked about how we're not going to bring toys or devices to the table.
Yeah.
Would you be able to tell me, sort of why you brought it here, or kind of have just like a little bit more of a conversation about it?
Yeah. It makes me think, and I don't know where you would put this in the process. It's like, I might bring in, telling my kids, we've made these agreements together. These are rules that we can always change. If you think that this rule is unfair, let's talk about it. instead of assuming that, you can go off and do it a different way, but I want to hear what's going on for you too. Like there's something about that I think that seems reasonable in this
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And also when we know what our needs are, sometimes the request that we want to make isn't even really directly about the child, right? So like, I had a client and she told me about how she was like having a stressful day and she was in bed at night and she was like, just wanted to get some rest, but she was also thinking about all the things she had to do the next day. And her teenage son comes in and he's like, Mom, I forgot to tell you, but my retainer broke and I need to get a new retainer.
Yeah.
Right. And she's like, really wanted to like laugh, kind of like explode.
Yeah.
But that explosion had nothing to do with right. It was all about all of her stuff that was coming up. Right. And she realized like what she needed in that moment was rest. Right. What she really needed in that moment was just like a little bit of ease, to feel like life was a little bit easier, right? Like that her responsibilities weren't so pressing. And so the request that she had to make really didn't have to do with the retainer or the kid, right? She was like, you know what, I need some rest right now. Can we look at it tomorrow and we'll figure out, right, when we can fix this, or I have a lot of things to do tomorrow. If I tell you what to do, like, would you be able to call the orthodontist and ask the receptionist for an appointment? Right. I don't know. So like, having that awareness, that self-awareness can really just kind of open things up.
Yeah, this is great. So for people listening who are considering, okay, I'm open to this idea of making requests a thing in my family. What do you think is like one of the biggest hurdles in getting that going in the family? What's that implementation period?
Yeah.
What's going to be a big hurdle?
Yeah. If you go and read the Substack post that I wrote about this, right? I think one of the biggest hurdles is hearing no. Like, why would I open myself up? My kid says no all the time. Like, I don't want to hear no anymore. Like, why would I make requests, and then hear no?
Yeah.
And so the thing that I've learned through this process of making requests and getting no's is this idea that no isn't the end of the conversation, but it can really be the beginning, right? Because no is an invitation to find out more about what's not working about my request, what's alive for this kid right now, like what's going on with them. And a lot of parents shy away from making requests because they think, okay, so then I'm going to give a kid all the power, and she's going to be the one who decides, and then I won't be able to decide, and I won't be able to get my needs met, right? But that's actually not what a request is about. A request is about collaboration. It's the beginning of a collaboration. So this is what I need. Would you be able to meet that?
Yeah.
Right. And then the other person says, yes, I can. And you feel great because you're getting your needs met, but also you feel like you guys are working together, right? This idea.
You honored someone and there is something, the relationship is honored.
That's right. That's right. But if they say no, right, then we get a chance to learn. Okay, tell me more. That's interesting. I want you to take out the trash right now. That's what I'm asking you to do. And, you haven't done it. It's 20 minutes. It's a nonverbal no to me. Right. So, right. I want to know what's going on here. Like what? Yeah. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you, right?
Yeah.
Are you worried about something else? Sometimes it's like our kids are human beings, right? When I don't want to do a task, I'm going to procrastinate on other things too, right? It's like, because there's one thing that's bothering me, like all my other things get affected. So we can find out more about what they need. And maybe what they need is more rest or more play or something. That doesn't mean the trash doesn't get taken out, right? It just means, okay, let's figure out a way to get both things met. Let's figure out a way to have a win-win solution here.
Mhm.
And that, teaching your kids how to do that, right? Our kids are going to be someone's college roommate someday. How are they
Mhm.
going to figure out, how to negotiate all of the things you have to negotiate in all of these relationships? I
Yeah.
think they can learn it from us and
Yeah.
with them.
And it strikes me that the mindset shift might have to also include how we think about time and patience and the willingness to stop. If I'm reading a book and I've made this agreement with my child, they're going to clean the dishes. They're not. Now I have to stop this thing.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, I just want some adult consistent activity. But now I have to stop and do the family thing. And that's, a very childlike way to see parenting. But I can imagine that coming up for people too. And it would definitely come up for me. The
Yeah.
part of me that wants to not feel interrupted and have to spend a little extra time in this conversation of exploration. Anything you can add around that?
Yeah. I mean, I say in the post, like, none of us are perfect at following the rule. And a lot of whether or not I do sort of make the time to make a request and then sort of follow through on all of the collaboration that happens after does have to do with how resourced I'm feeling in the moment. So, am I rested, right? Am I stressed about other stuff in my life that's happening that might impact how open I am at that moment?
Yeah.
Um, taking the time is almost always worth it, right? In the end, I'm always happy that
Mhm.
we had the conversation in a way that really lives out the values that I have in my parenting. But I also think, like, in that moment when you're sitting and you're reading and you're not wanting to be interrupted, but the agreement isn't being met by the other person,
Mhm.
I wonder if you could check in with yourself about your needs and, you know, make a choice about which needs you want to fulfill in that moment, right? Like,
Mhm.
we're often going to have competing needs. Like, is it okay for you to keep reading on the couch
Yeah.
and your child is not doing the dishes,
Mhm.
and for you to decide, in this moment, my choice is to keep reading
Yeah.
because this can be addressed in some other time. So that's the other thing is
Mhm.
we can make requests sort of, I think of them sometimes as like delayed requests. Like
Mhm.
something happens during a rush time or a pressured time, and we're kind of just dealing with it the best we can. But then I think I put it in my, my head, and I'm like, okay, later on,
Mhm.
we're going to talk about, right? So we have like a weekly family meeting, right? And
Yeah.
I'm always like, okay, this is the time for me to, and that's often how I ask families to start with this work is, don't try to do it on the fly when, everybody's kind of rushed and pressured.
Yeah.
Do it in a container that you sort of have set aside, Sunday dinner, a weekly family meeting where everybody's relaxed, you're out of
Mhm.
the moment. But that's a place to say, hey, would you be able to do this? Or I noticed that you weren't able to do this before, but
Yeah. Which I can imagine allows for, in my case, let's say my nervous system to calm down if it was activated, so that I'm bringing something of a more neutral or maybe even like excited, like playful energy to the conversation instead
yeah,
of that charge, which is then, oh, that's what's going on with that charge, and that's confusing and distracting from the original intention of the conversation.
yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Um, so I wonder, so in the implementing itself, what are moments to look out for? Let's say the conversation has happened. Maybe there's been a container held. Family is all in agreement. We're going to try this experiment.
Mhm.
Um, what to look out for that could take the whole experiment down?
Yeah. Um, well, I think it's interesting, our brains are, we all know about our brains being in survival mode and trying to keep us alive, and right. And so they're looking for pattern recognition, right? And often they'll be like, they're looking for working, not working, working, not working, working, not working, working, not working, right? And so there is a tendency when we start off on something like this as, you know, sort of, oh, I'm going to make this shift in my communication style or whatever, where we will not be implementing it well, or the other person will not be receiving it well, or it's kind of like, you know, the kid just keeps saying no, and then we're stuck and we don't know what to do. And our brain will be like, okay, well, this isn't working. It's not working. Stop. Like, this doesn't work. Go back to the other thing, or try this other thing instead. And what I think is interesting about that, and what I've really worked on in the last few years, is challenging, like when we say something's not working, right? Like, along which axis, right? Or by what rubric is it?
Yeah. Can you give an example to help clarify this as we go?
Yeah. So I have this ongoing thing with my daughter, and when she gets home from school, she does not want to hang up her backpack. I mean, you know, it's like we want her to do three things: up your shoes and put them somewhere someone's not going to trip. Hang up your jacket. Unpack the lunchbox from the book bag. Like, it's not a lot of things. And then she gets this time to like decompress and whatever, right? Like, we're not like, do your homework, you know, it feels to me, right? Like, as a grown up, like, that's not a lot. And we can't seem to figure it, like, we can't figure it out, right? Like, in the moment, I'll be like, hey, do you think you would be able to do that? Like, we've talked about it. And she'll be like, some days she says yes. Right. And then like 5 minutes later, she still hasn't done it. You know, some days she'll like, I don't, you know, to kind of like use this as her chance to unpack and whine for, you know, let off some of the emotions from the day that she's holding on to. And so I can look at that situation and be like, it's not working.
Not working. Yeah.
I've made requests like 17 times and it's not working. But if I use a rubric for working that's something closer to, am I upholding the values that I want to be embodying as a mom, as a parent, when we're interacting about this?
Yeah. Right.
So my, you know, the values that I have as a parent is, you know, I want to, curiosity, right? Collaboration, connection, right? And when I think about those values, right, am I living those up? Now, she's still not doing it. She's still not consistently, like, we have not nailed it. We haven't, right? But how am I showing up as a mom, right? And I feel pretty good about the balance of, you know, times that I'm showing up with curiosity and connection and collaboration. Yeah. In those moments. And so, you know, that's the marathon of parenting, right? That's playing the long game, as opposed to, but I just got to get the jacket hung up. I just got to get the backpack off the bench. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. The reason I'm sitting with this because we relate, my family would relate to the same. My daughter is learning how to come in the house and do a couple things to put her bag in a place that's not in the way and lunchbox out, etc. And that play of, I can imagine for me, it's the ego drive, that, you know, desire to be in control versus connection will trigger often. And the whole notion of like values alignment can quickly become a nice idea instead of like, actually, I have an opportunity here to go really deep into myself as a human being, to be in partnership with this other human being that's young and learning a lot of things, and they're going to take a long time to learn their way. It's so easy to forget that long vision in the moment.
Yeah. I'm constantly, that's like me and my best friend, we're just constantly like, it's a long game. Like, play the long game. Like,
Yeah.
that's the only way to win. Right? Because we're never
Yeah.
like, we have this illusion as human beings that we're going to be able to, if we could just, find the right magic bullet, then we could get in control of our kids and they would perform it all perfectly. And then we'd be able to say, yes, I'm the perfect mom. Right. But that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's, and so we have to train our brains to, go towards something that we're more in control of, which is really our own response.
Yeah. Well, when you say the word win, it makes me think of when I think of change in general, and I sometimes do this in a work context, it's like when asking people to change, how can we reinforce the change and how can we celebrate and reward the new habits being exemplified, those moments of accomplishment in the right direction, even if it's just, this, daughter said to son several requests instead of demands. What can we say about that in the family system? What can we reward or celebrate, or do you see it differently? Or
yes, I mean, I think just the fact that in our family, right, you can say to anyone can say to anyone else, would you make a request? Like when a demand is coming at us, and whether you're a kid or an adult, you're allowed to ask for that.
Yeah.
And that's big.
Mm-hmm.
That's big, right? And
That means my voice matters no matter who I am in the family.
That's right. That's right. And, I think it is hard sometimes. Like I said, it's like we're trained to look for, our brains are trained sometimes on the wrong things when we're trying to celebrate those successes, right? So if we look for, sort of like, how is the communication in my house? Like, how does it sound different now than it sounded a week ago, a month ago? And it's not about like, does it sound perfect now? And is everybody making requests all the time perfectly, right? It's really just about like, that 1%, 2% shift.
Yeah.
And then making space. I'm such a big fan of containers, families making containers where those kinds of changes and improvements can be celebrated. So whether it's Friday nights, everybody goes around and says something good, or, at our family meetings, we always start off with something we call appreciations, where we appreciate each other in the family. And that's just sort of creating that feeling of acknowledgement and, and I think that's really important for both the kids and the grown-ups.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very sweet practice. And my wife and I have done some meetings on our own, but including the kids in that, I think would be amazing.
Yeah.
Appreciations between generations. Very important.
Yeah, it's really cool. And you know what, because I was a teacher. That was like my first job. And I was teaching in this really tough school in the South Bronx. And the first 2 months were just so hard. And I came down the office and the assistant principal must have just seen the look on my face. And he gave me this advice that stuck with me. It changed my teaching life, but it also really has changed my family life too, which is make sure you give the kids an opportunity to appreciate you. Like, make space for them to give back to you.
Yeah. What does that, what does that look like? How do you create space for them to give back to you in that context?
So I started doing on Fridays, last thing of the day, we would sit in a big circle and we'd go child by child, and each child, so it was that child's turn, other kids would raise their hand and appreciate that kid. So every child would receive an appreciation or a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was always the last one.
Oh.
So I was like, and what about me? Does anybody want to appreciate or
Yeah.
compliment me on anything that they appreciated this week?
Yeah.
And it was just an amazing way to end
Mm.
the week. And that's how we do it in our family meetings too, is we've done it so long that it's sort of an unspoken structure now, but it's by person. So it's kind of like, and then we're mindful of who hasn't gotten one yet. And we don't stop until everyone's gotten one.
Yeah. At least one.
Yeah.
I like that. That's I'd like to do that at work too.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
So great.
So this has been awesome. I want to just give you the last word. So if there's anything you want to say to the parents, the dads, the moms listening, what would you like to leave us with?
I guess the biggest thing I want to leave you with is, it's really easy to hear parenting advice and not always easy to follow everything that we know, right? And that's just being a human being, right? And I encourage parents to have grace with themselves, right? I always encourage them, like, keep learning, keep trying to do better, but also, giving ourselves grace, because we don't have to do it perfectly for our parenting to be powerful.
Yeah. Well said. I so appreciate you taking this time with me today.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah. And we spoke before, we thought we might swear, and we never did.
I did say asshole.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying it again.
Now we got extra points.
Yeah.